Fire Emblem is an incredibly tropey series, always has been, probably always will be. From gameplay elements to story beats and character design, recurring tropes are everywhere. Is that a bad thing? Not necessarily, no. In fact, I think that in a game series that creates a brand new cast of characters and world every time, it is borderline essential. But of course, not every trope is equal. Some provide exactly that hint of familiarity that you want in a new world, to remind you this is a Fire Emblem game. Others, I really wouldn't mind if we never saw them again. And let's start with one of the most prevalent tropes of all of them, yet also one of the most unpopular, I feel like. At least, I've never seen anyone who enjoyed it, and I can't say I do so myself either. I'm talking about dead parents, which usually can be reduced to dead fathers, but there are some games that grant a mother or mother figure an untimely death, like Lumera in Engage and Emmerin in Awakening. But holy crap man, this list is so long. Marv's father Cornelius, Eliwood's father Albert, Ike's father Grill, Erica and Evreem's father Fado, Sumeragi, Gerald, Morion, Hector and Binding Blade, Gustav and Heroes, it goes on and on. And to make matters even worse, starting the game with the father figure already dead, like say Sumeragi and Fates, that's one thing. It's a little boring, but that wouldn't be so bad. But the vast majority of these fathers I just named, they die in the story itself, with their death supposed to be a heart-wrenching moment that either is the emotional climax or works as a key motivation for the children left behind that get their revenge. And while that works in-universe, it's as if the story writers don't realize the players haven't actually grown up inside that game world. Lords being devastated at the death of their parents is only logical, but we as players have barely even known them, even the ones that die later on in the story rather than in the first few chapters. They still are light on screen time. I feel like Gerald and Emmerin are probably the parental figures with the most screen time before their death, and they are easily the most successful of the group too, because they are the only ones that come close to hitting the entire point of this idea. Making players feel something, being an emotional moment. But even if these were parents we had spent the entire game alongside and it would be painful to see them go, then the fact that is a trope in the first place completely kills any sense of emotional damage this might cause. After all, it's noteworthy if a parent lives to see the credits at this point. That is how common this is. So anyone who has ever played a Fire Emblem game before will know the moment a parent is introduced, there's a 80% chance, if not more, you'll be asked to cry over their death sooner rather than later. And that is a real problem. If there's anything at all, that should never be a recurring trope, it's a story beat that's either supposed to be surprising or emotional. Cause if those become tropes, they lose their entire reason for existing. And that means that what I think is actually a pretty effective storytelling method ends up becoming something I'd rather see ditched entirely for at least like 3 games. So the idea of this being a trope can fade and we can then be hit by a potential death again in the hopes that it will finally have some impact. So yeah, this is a thing that I don't think is bad necessarily, I think it's a pretty good idea in fact, it's just possibly one of the worst things to make a trope out of all of them. And that same thing also applies to the next trope I want to talk about. Dragons as the final boss. Look, on one hand, I get why IS goes back to this so much. You're fighting people the entire way here. It can be incredibly difficult to make a final boss feel powerful, yet realistic within the world if they're still a person of flesh and blood, so they're often turned into a dragon instead. Now, I can stomach this if it's at least a character we've seen or been in contact with throughout the entire game, so think Sombron, Rhea, Duma, etc. They're all present before their final battle in a human form, and only then do they become dragons. If that was just it, I would just about be okay with it, but the fact that there are also quite some names who we have barely seen before fighting them in the final battle pushes this trope over the edge into problem territory. Blazing Blade's Fire Dragon is the perfect example. I would even consider Idun to fit this category, since while she isn't technically first seen at the end, it does feel that way. And then you also have the characters who are only mentioned prior to being introduced near the end, like Medeus, Grima and Anankos. I know that it's a JRPG trope to defeat the actual main antagonist a few moments before the end, with the true final boss then usually being some larger-than-life godlike being that the real villain was supposed to summon, but there is something incredibly unsatisfactory about it if you ask me. And in game series where the focus is more on exploration or spectacle, I think it makes sense, but for a series that makes story and characters as important as Fire Emblem, I don't think it's a good thing that basically every game ends like this. And what's even sadder is that the few games that don't literally do this make basically the same mistake. Azure Moon doesn't end with a dragon, because Edogar transforms into some other monstrosity instead. Conquest doesn't end with a monster boss, it ends with Takumi out of nowhere. Verdant Wind's Nemesis at least makes more sense, but it's still not a satisfying final boss per se, I would argue, and while Fomortis definitely is, his true form is not what we spent the entire game fighting against. And so, the list of Fire Emblem final bosses that truly feel like the game is building up towards defeating them is surprisingly low. Usually they come in the few chapters prior, or they turn into monsters that only vaguely resemble them still at the final moment. I gotta say though, while I feel optimistic that Dead Parents might actually be abandoned for a bit in the future, this one doesn't feel like it's going anywhere. It's such a staple of not just Fire Emblem but the entire JRPG genre that I'm not sure IS is ever gonna put it aside, especially when you consider the aforementioned struggle of them clearly not wanting the final boss to be a flesh and blood person. I mean, that has literally never happened, right? The closest are possessed people, I think, so Takumi, Julius, Ashnard, etc. And while we're on the topic of antagonists, I am not a big fan of the trope that has become known as the Camus archetype. It worked for the OG Camus, and it makes for a nice 1-2 when he actually does end up joining you in Mystery of the Emblem, but more often than not, these folks just feel dumb and mostly unrealistic. Like, I get the entire point is that they're loyal to a fault or blind to the wrongdoings of their leaders, but for a good segment of these characters, it just makes them either look ridiculously ignorant, unintelligent, or not really morally redeemable, as is the entire point. Take Selena from Sacred Stones. Clearly a Camus based on everything we see of her in cutscenes, even if she does end up going through with the orders that appall her so much. And at no point in time does she realize she's taking orders from a reanimated corpse? That doesn't reflect too well on her. Same with how her loyalty basically has no boundary. Sure, you can be shocked at every order thrown your way, but if you keep abiding by the orders for no reason beyond loyalty and a belief your leader is right, how are you in any way, shape or form still redeemable like the original Camus was? Cause that's the thing, at least Camus was fighting for something. He was effectively blackmailed into remaining loyal to Dole. You cannot say the same thing about the vast majority of the members of the archetype that followed. Like, Xander is a main character in Fates, a super important one, but his actions in Birthright reflect so incredibly poorly on him. That he can't see what is going on with Garon makes him look dumb, the fact he insists on fighting Corin to the death when he literally just killed Elise is insane, and this is a character we are supposed to fight alongside in a different version of this game. Now, I'm not saying this trope can't work, it has in the past, like with Mustafa from Awakening for example, but the way it has been incorporated more often than not has soured me on the idea, if I'm being honest. It has been a while since we've seen this archetype though, so perhaps it can be brought back and revived in a good way in a certain upcoming game. And finally, my most hated trope of all, one that I suspect might be preaching to the choir a bit, since, from what I can tell, the vast majority of the fanbase, and especially the people outside of it, hate this one. The 100-year-old dragons that somehow possess the body of an underage girl. The Tikis, the Fays, the Noes, the Veils, you know the type. Now, whether there is even a place in Fire Emblem for underage characters, especially playable ones, is debatable in and of itself, but while I wouldn't shed a single tear if they decided to never do it again, I personally think Fire Emblem tone-wise is not always so gritty and dark that the idea of child soldier really becomes a problem. Like, technically Jean from Engage is a child soldier, obviously, but Engage's tone is so unserious that I think that term is definitely too heavy for what's happening here. So, while not a fan, I'm not against underaged playable characters. Where I do draw the line though is, well, designing them to look as ridiculously young as the Manichees look, and then also sexualizing them. All of these characters fall into one of these two categories. I would say Faye and Myrrh are not really sexualized at all, so that's good, but they look way too young to be anywhere near a weapon. Faye looks like she's what, 4? 5 years old? Jean is currently the youngest playable character and he's 10, that's a massive gap still. Tiki definitely looks a little older, around Jean's age I would say, and even though I don't think she was created to be sexualized, there is no denying there is way too much official artwork at this point that shows Tiki's upper thighs like there's anything you want to see up there. And then of course her actual in-game age starts to feel less like a character trait and more like permission. Permission for something I know is more acceptable in anime circles than in real life, and I don't like it at all. And then you have Noe, Sophis, Flane and Vil, who I would say look more like young teens, but certainly still underage by a good few years, which makes it staggering that Noe is wearing an outfit even Farja finds revealing, and all three of them are romanceable by characters that, again, based on look, are twice their age. But once again, the game allows it and gives you permission because they are technically centuries old. It's weird, it's uncomfortable, it has to stop. If you want to include a character that is a 1000-year-old dragon but looks much younger, be my guest. Just do it in the same way you did with Rhea, Sedef or Tiki in Awakening. If you want to sexualize a character, I mean, don't go overboard. I can't say I'm liking Camilla more as a result of her portrayal, but okay, I can live with it. And if you want to include underage characters, again, not in favor necessarily, but as long as they're actual kids and treated like kids, it's whatever. But please, never again put these three concepts together. I can't believe this has even withstood the test of time to become a trope to begin with. Unfortunately, it does feel like Noe was the lowest point, so to speak, as the sexualization has definitely been toned down since then. But is it really so hard to make every romanceable character at least look like an adult? I mean, we're now at the point where I've spent this entire time talking about this trope through the age and design lens, but I'm actually not a fan of it from a story and character standpoint either, because most of these characters blend together and it has never really been necessary for them to be so young. I'd say the best characters fitting this trope are Tiki when she returns in Awakening, which isn't actually an underage design at all and only fits the trope for who she used to be, as well as the two Free Houses examples, namely Flane and Sophis. And both of those gain absolutely nothing by looking like a teenager. If anything, I think it hurts Sophie specifically more than it helps. It's hard to take her serious as the goddess she is, but maybe that's intentional, I don't know. Either way, stop this trope. We don't need it in any future games, and let's hope Sophis being aged up is a sign IS has finally got the message. But what do you consider the worst tropes in Fire Emblem? Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing. If you really want to support me, you can now become a channel member to get all kinds of fun perks and help me keep bringing these videos to your doorstep every week. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.